Welcome to week 5 of Church at Home, whether you're online, whether you're on disc, or whether you're on paper. Easter is our greatest festival, and the weeks after it can feel a bit of a letdown. Nothing can top the resurrection of Jesus, so what can possibly follow? This week we'll be thinking about just that. We aren't having an extended series looking at encounters that followers had with Jesus after his resurrection, though those are the stories that I'll be telling Junior Church. But we are going to think about what he said to his closest friends just before he returned to the Father. So with that in mind, let's come to God in prayer. Loving God, we thank you for the joy that your resurrection brought, but we know your followers were still confused and hesitant. In our current time of confusion and fear, help us to experience the joy of your presence with us, and help us to share the comfort and peace you offer to those with whom we can safely have conversations. Amen. On to the studies then. So this week, as we're thinking about music and sung worship, perhaps to sing along to, or perhaps to listen to, we're going to be thinking about the fact that nothing like the resurrection had ever happened before or has ever happened since. But the same power that God used to raise Jesus from the dead is at work in us. So we have much to praise and thank God for. You might like to use one of the traditional hymns like Praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King of Creation, or Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven, or Dear Lord and Father of Mankind. Perhaps you prefer something shorter and choruses would fit, like For Thou, O Lord, art high above all the earth, or Great is the Lord. You may prefer one of the more modern hymns like He is Exalted, or From the Highest of Heights. It's good to remind ourselves that the God we worship is bigger and more wonderful than we can ever imagine, yet he still loves us and lives with us through his Spirit. Enjoy your sung worship, whether through listening or singing this week. Hello Julia Church, I'm going to tell you another story this week, and it's a story again of friends who met Jesus after he was raised from the dead, but who weren't really sure until something particular happened. And the person in the story whose name we know is Cleopas, but we know he was walking with his friend, and some people suggest it might have been his wife. So I'm going to tell you the story this week as if I was that other person walking with Cleopas on the road to Emmaus. We were so miserable, Cleopas and I. We'd pinned all our hopes on this rabbi, like a religious teacher from Galilee. We really thought he was the one promised by God to rescue our people. But then the temple authorities stirred up trouble for him with the Romans, and they killed him. Hung him up on a cross like a common criminal. And that was the death of him, and the death of all our hopes and dreams. So we were walking home from the festival, feeling lousy instead of celebratory. And then this bloke walked up alongside us. "Oh, why do you look so grumpy?" he said. And it was like he'd been on another planet for the week, not in Jerusalem. He didn't seem to know anything about Jesus, how the crowds loved him but then turned away, how he tied the priests in knots over the law and showed us that ordinary people please God, how he really lived and then really died. Thorough, them Romans. Not content with hanging him up, they stuck a spear in him too. And we told this man how disappointed we were, because we really thought he was the chosen one. So then this stranger told us how thick we were, And how our scriptures were full of prophecies that said the chosen one would die. How Abraham never had to sacrifice Isaac because one day another father would sacrifice his son. How all those sheep and doves sacrificed in the temple pointed to a greater sacrifice someone else would make. How Isaiah even told that we would reject the chosen one, and the psalmist described how it would happen. Everything that happened was as our scriptures had said they would be, but we just hadn't had the eyes to see it. It was getting dark by the time we got to Emmaus, where Cleopas lived, so he invited this man in to eat and stay over before journeying on. And as we sat at the table, this man took the host's role. He took the bread and prayed to God and then broke it. And then he disappeared. And I looked at Cleopas and I said, "Didn't your heart burn as you listened to him speak?" And he said, "It did, it did." It was him. We just didn't have the eyes to see him. And we forgot dinner, and we ran all the way back to Jerusalem to tell the others that we had seen Jesus, and he is alive.
Then the 11 disciples left for Galilee, going to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some of them doubted. Jesus came and told his disciples, "I've been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I've given you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age."
This week in our Bible teaching, we're thinking about what happened after Jesus was raised from the dead. And the very end of Matthew's Gospel, which you've heard read or hopefully have had a chance to read, gives some telling news about exactly that and points the way forward for us. So thinking about the disciples and what happened with them, the first thing was that the disciples did what Jesus said. They returned to Galilee and went to the hill or mountain, and we don't know which one it was because it isn't named, but they obviously did know. It might seem obvious that they would do what Jesus said, but perhaps we should think about how often we clearly know what Jesus wants but fail to do it. The second thing about the disciples was that despite being confused, the disciples worshipped. Indeed, it may well be precisely because they naturally fell to worship that they then became confused or hesitant, which is probably a better translation here than doubted. They were Jews who believed in one God who had said that they were to worship no one else. To find themselves worshipping Jesus and him accepting their worship must have really challenged all their thinking and understanding. In our worship, we need have no such doubts, though sometimes in times of trouble we might feel distant from God and find worship a real sacrifice. How does Jesus respond then to his friends? Well, first he reassures them by reminding them of who he is. In fact, although they knew from their own experience that Jesus had authority on earth, he now tells them that his authority is extended into heaven. And that's still true today, and we can equally accept this reassurance that Jesus has the authority to back up everything he has said. Let's not fall into the trap of thinking this means that God has planned or sent hardship on us. Hebrews reminds us that God never tempts us. But we also need to remember we have a fatally wounded enemy who is still prowling around and snapping at humanity. The second thing that Jesus does is that he commissions the disciples to continue on with his mission of spreading good news to the whole world. This involves drawing people into a relationship with God and then helping them to also become disciples, to come to faith, to be baptized, and then be taught how to be obedient to all the teaching of Jesus. Obviously, the disciples were quite good at following that instruction, as were the generations that came afterwards. And we know that because the church has spread all around the world. What about our generation? In case the disciples were anxious, in case we are anxious that this task is beyond them or beyond us, Jesus reassured them again by telling them that he would always be with them to help them. That is very reassuring for us too. So next time you're chatting with someone, online, on the phone, over the fence, or perhaps on the landing, pray for sensitivity to hear where there is an opening to talk about your faith, to share your experience, or to offer hope. Maybe you could even suggest they come online and check out church, or lend them your notes or your discs. This week, as we come to a time of prayer, I'm going to use that well-known device that I use within church sometimes, the idea of a teaspoon of prayer, where we have a section of thanks and a section of sorries and a section of pleas where we make our requests. So, starting with thanks, think of all the things you have that you are grateful for. Food, running water, a flushing toilet, a home, a choice of clothes, sunshine, rain, flowers, rainbows, music, books, toys, computers, even the telly. Think of all the people you know who you are grateful for. Family, friends, neighbours, the workers who keep everything running. Thank God for these things and these people. They are all gifts from God. Perhaps you might think about putting a piece of paper up on the door and keep adding to your list of things or people that you are grateful for throughout the week. What about sorry? Even when we're home alone, we can still mess things up. We might be impatient or rude about a politician who comes on the news, or rude to the people we are sharing our house with or live next door to. We might make noise and disturb the neighbours. We might be greedy for treats to reward our being good and staying home. We might have drifted away from the things we normally do to pattern our days, including prayer and reading the Bible. So spend some time sitting quietly with God and ask him by his Spirit to highlight things that have spoiled or weakened your relationship with him. Then ask honestly for forgiveness and for the strength to resist temptation, knowing that God is faithful and right to forgive us because of the cross. Moving on then to our requests, it's good to remember that God is a good Father, not an impatient, angry one. He likes us to ask him for things that are good for us and good for others. So think about what your own needs are and bring them to God. They might be practical things, or things that are less tangible, like the need to be encouraged. Think about your neighbours and what good things they need, and ask God to bless them too. Think about people in authority who need wisdom, stamina and courage. Think about frontline workers, including people like the bin men, fruit pickers, shop workers and delivery drivers. Ask for their protection and skill to do their jobs. Think about those who are ill and ask for their healing and for peace of heart and mind. And ask for comfort and peace too for those who are bereaved. This week I'm going to ask you to pray for G's pastoral group, which includes some people very recently bereaved, and at least one who was bereaved a little while ago, but not too long ago. So please remember in your prayers too, Carol A, Shirley B and Chad, Leslie J, Goody L, Diane M and Natalie, Shami P, Sharon S, Jean S, Rudley W and Rob W. Come to God with confidence, remembering that Jesus has blazed the trail for us all the way into the throne room of heaven.